Meanwhile, you're readying for your plans for the holiday weekend, right? And you start looking around at what's going on with gas prices, and they are coming down, which is interesting. Yeah, just this morning I saw $2.35 on the way in, and now Gas Buddy locally is saying we're down below $2.30 right now in some places, $2.28 at Sam's Club, for example, and not much more than that in some places where membership is not required. And so kind of interesting, there was even a story floating around West Michigan yesterday about the potential for $1.99. Huh? Is this 4th of July or what? Gregg Laskoski is here from GasBuddy.com to talk to us a little bit about that. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
So are the oil company executives a little feverish or what?
Well, it's been a very strange year, but we've seen that oil prices have really traded in a very narrow range and in a low range for a long, long time. When you hear these analysts talk about $50 oil as if that's a rally, that really tells you that something's been very odd here. But on top of all that, we usually, when you hear that consumption is at record-setting levels, we're looking at oil production matching the highest production levels ever set, which go back to August of 2007. You would think if demand is up that much, prices have to be going up too, because those two things usually move together.
Yeah.
But this is a year where even though demand is very high because of the low prices, we see prices actually moving lower as we go into a major travel holiday. It's very peculiar.
Any idea why?
Well, yes. The reason we're seeing these prices go lower has everything to do with the energy boom that this country has experienced in the last several years. And it's not just an American condition, but fracking has made it possible for countries all over the world to gain access to oil, whether it's natural gas or petroleum, in places that previously were inaccessible. And that means exponentially greater production that has outpaced the global pace of consumption. So that's why we have a global oil glut that has really suppressed prices everywhere.
That's interesting. So, like fracking or not, it's having an effect.
Oh, no question about it. And it's many of the analysts will tell you that it could be by the end of next year before the supply-demand balance moves closer together.
Interesting. 8:13, we're talking with Gregg Laskoski of GasBuddy.com about why gas prices are low, particularly headed into a summer holiday weekend like 4th of July. We'll pick up where we leave off in just a minute, including some of those old excuses we used to hear about why gas prices were changing so much, like, the summer blends and all that stuff. We'll talk about that coming up in just a minute on WBCK. We're talking about gasoline here just before the holiday weekend. Gregg Laskoski is with us from GasBuddy.com. So, it is interesting. The supply and demand idea makes sense, of course, but does it matter with gasoline in that, most of us are going to buy it no matter what? So why don't the oil companies say, let's just make it $4 a gallon, we're going to sell it anyway?
Well, there's a lot of problems with that. First, it would require collusion, which is still illegal, thank God.
Yeah, right.
That's kind of simplistic, and it's all different parts of the country. A lot of people don't really appreciate the size of the United States until they start hearing about things going on in Europe, and they get a sense of really what kind of a scale we operate on. We have refineries in so many different parts of the country, but we have a very small number of refineries, let's say, in the Great Lakes region. We have an enormous number in the Gulf Coast region. Mm-hmm. And, then you go to California. California used to be a major oil-producing state. Now they basically rely on 11 or 12 refineries for the entire state. And when there's a glitch at two of them, they see spikes that make the Michigan spikes look like nothing. You know, it's really remarkable when you start talking about the regional differences in refinery production and the challenges that means also, because they don't just have to refine it. Then there's the process of getting it, you know, to the end users, and not everybody lives within, you know, 50 miles of a refinery. It's got to go a long distance in many instances.
Mm-hmm. So that still applies then. Issues like that still cause us to pay more, but well, I guess when it's not $3 and $4 a gallon, we don't see it, so we don't feel it as much.
Well, that's right. You know, when prices move to a lower range, you know, to less than $3, less than $2.50 a gallon, we're less sensitive to the price fluctuations. And the same would hold true, you know, when you go into the grocery store. If you see gas, or I should say, a gallon of milk at close to $4 a gallon, people start scratching their heads and say, "What's going on?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at this point, what about the whole story we used to hear about the summer blend and the winter blend, and well, we got to change over, and that costs more, and so on? Does that still apply?
It does, unfortunately. I know people think that that's just a horrendous excuse that the oil industry comes up with, but believe it or not, it's a federal mandate. The refineries have no option. They have to meet the mandate that calls for that summer blend. The reason they have it is because it's to have gasoline that burns cleaner in the summer months. It's an EPA mandate, and that means that the refineries have to be prepared to have that cleaner gas, which costs more because it has more additives that allows the gas to burn cleaner. So if you think about it, you're talking about paying more for gasoline at the time of year when there's greater demand for it in spring and summer, and then the reason prices drop every year like clockwork once you get Labor Day weekend behind us is because not only does demand drop, but refineries, as they get into October, can then sell a cheaper gasoline. The winter blend has fewer additives, and it even takes them less time to produce it. So that's the reason why you see gas prices drop significantly every year, and that's why we always see the lowest prices generally in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that still applies. The rub then still is with the refineries, because we can frack all we want, I presume, but we're not increasing the number of refineries out there, so it still has to be processed there, and that's where the bottleneck could be.
That's exactly right. Now, fortunately, even though we haven't added to the number of refineries in more than 30 years, the existing refineries, a number of them have been able to increase capacity with engineering achievements that are too detailed to get into right now, but they have been able to expand capacity in some places. And then if there's some good news here for consumers, it's also that because the automakers are producing more fuel-efficient vehicles, if we all drive the same number of miles this year that we drove last year, we're basically going to consume less gasoline because there's going to be a number of us that are moving from an older vehicle into a more fuel-efficient, newer one.
And I was going to bring that up, too, and we'll talk about that and what Gas Buddy perceives to be what might happen, the balance of the summer and so on, as far as prices are concerned. We'll continue in just a minute. A few more minutes with Gregg Laskoski of GasBuddy.com. So if you could give us any sort of notion for how long we'll stay down here in the relatively low twos, what are your thoughts, Greg?
Well, it's really good news, I think, for consumers right now, because it looks like the peak for gasoline prices may already be behind us. The national average right now is about 9 cents lower than the peak that we saw 3 weeks ago at about $2.39. In Michigan, we see the statewide average at $2.43, and that's declined by 13 cents a gallon just in the past week. But more importantly, the current price is 45 cents lower than what we were paying a year ago. We believe that we are going to be moving into a steady decrease from now through the remainder of the summer. I think you're going to see prices moderate lower. Obviously, with the Great Lakes and in Michigan, you see, it's never a steady decline. It ratchets like stairs, where you go up and then down. You have greater volatility both to the upside and the downside, but overall, you still come out ahead because looking at the forecast, we're still expecting you're going to see prices get probably close to $2 a gallon by late September.
Yeah, and I think that was some of what I saw floating around yesterday in the media was somebody saying $1.99. That gets people excited. They think that might be, next week or something. Might not be that soon.
It won't be next week, but it is on the horizon. And as you said earlier, already in Battle Creek, we see prices. The lowest is at a Sam's Club at $2.23, but we also see in the same area, 11 Mile Road and I-94, 2 or 3 stations at $2.28 or $2.29 a gallon.
Right. Yeah. So that's. You talk about the ratcheting, that's down, 10 cents or more from just last week.
Yes.
So what accounts for that ratcheting? What's unique about Michigan?
In Michigan and the Great Lakes region, you have a retail environment that the federal government characterizes as price cycling. And what that means is you have a couple of dominant chains that can drive prices very low, sometimes to the point where they're losing money on the gasoline just so that they can get folks in the door to buy everything else. And what that does is it puts tremendous pressure on all of the other retailers who will try to follow them to the low end as long as they possibly can. But then there's a point where those dominant retail chains have it's a formula that identifies when they should bounce their prices back up, and when those prices bounce, it's not incrementally; it's a huge spike to the upside.
Yeah.
When that happens, all of the other retailers follow them the same way because they want to capture the opportunity to try to regain the margins that they surrendered when they were following them to the downside. So that's what it's all about, and apparently the federal government doesn't have any problem with it.
And doing that is more profitable for them than staying lower and having everybody flock to them because they're lower.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the issue of more fuel-efficient cars, CAFE standards, government pressuring the automakers to make more fuel-efficient vehicles. That means we're using less gas. The oil companies, I don't know whether it's feasible to lobby against that, but what do they do in light of that?
I don't know that there's much that they can do. Earlier this year, I thought it was very telling to hear the oil minister from Saudi Arabia advise that the country has to diversify its economy. I think they recognize that they're involved in a battle for market share, where even if demand grows, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to grow exponentially as they did for the last 50 years. They're starting to see, in OPEC, for instance, the Saudis are not just competing with North America, with Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. They're competing amongst each other. And that's the real battle going on. They pushed prices as low as they could to try to pressure the U.S. into a situation where we had to reduce production, and it was that tactic has worked for a while. But again, it's got consequences for everyone, whether you're in the Middle East or whether you're in North America.
Seems like when we were close to $4 a gallon, every little world event, terrorist attack in the farthest reaches of the world had an effect on our gas prices. Is that still the case, or is that still volatile?
That's a great question. I don't think those events have the same impact anymore, largely because North American production has grown so rapidly. When those things were occurring, as you pointed out, and it takes us back to 8 years. Back in 2008, we saw the national average price of gas peak at over $4 a gallon. Mm-hmm. Well, just look at how much more production has occurred as a result of fracking that has really grown, whether it's North Dakota or West Texas, new regions in the United States that are just booming because of oil production. And the same is true in Mexico. The same is true in Canada. And that's something that has really changed the balance of power. It's actually made OPEC perhaps a little bit less relevant.
Very interesting. Well, we appreciate the time you've given us, Greg. I imagine that with this kind of news, you get the red carpet rolled out for you a lot. Greg's got good news. Let's talk to him.
It helps to have good news once in a while.
That's right. Well, we appreciate it. Gregg Laskoski with GasBuddy.com. Thank you very much.